current trends in speech, specifically censorship. This is your boy Pac-Man here. Thanks for tuning in. Let's go ahead and get started. Recently, there's been a growing trend of major media and financial corporations limiting the speech of individuals. This has been done in a number of ways, most famously recently through restricting financial access through payment processors, being deplatformed or removed from access to social media platforms via interpretive enforcement of TOS, shadow banning practices of deprioritizing search results, comments, channel exposure, etc. As an American, I value our rights to free speech and expression. And in this video, I'll break down the concept from my perspective and how dangerous it is to our concept of speech. In the United States, we have speech protections guaranteed in our Constitution, like many other Western countries. Ours is enshrined in the First Amendment. It reads, prohibits Congress from making any laws respecting an establishment of religion, impeding the free exercise of religion, abridging the freedom of speech, infringing the freedom of speech, interfering with the right to peaceably assemble, or prohibiting the right to petition the government. Let's go ahead and quickly break those down into pieces really quick so we understand what we're talking about. And I mean real quick. The first pertains to the government creating a national religion, such as classifying as a religious state or creating a national religious institution. The second refers to the government interfering with you practicing your religion, as long as it doesn't violate any other sections of the Constitution, or, there's local limitations for public health, safety. There's also things like polygamy laws and stuff like that, which conflict with some religious practices, but, religions do have to, follow the laws of the land. The third refers to limiting a person's right to freely speak or expressing their ideas, provided that a list of things that aren't allowed, are followed. Those things are fraud, child porn, speech integral to illegal content, such as discussing, like planning a crime or something like that, incitement of lawless action, yelling fire in a crowded theater or something like that, or, saying, hey, kick that guy's ass, aggravation, pretty much picking a fight, something like that, defamation, invasion of privacy, emotional distress, now that I'll break down a little bit further, and regulation of commercial speech. Emotional distress is defined per the two cases against Larry Flynt in the Supreme Court, and pretty much what it was about in very short was, in Hustler magazine there were parodies, especially political parodies, and they were trying to censor that as not allowed under free speech. Supreme Court ruled that those fell under general parody, caricature, and satire of a figure considered a public figure, therefore allowed under the First Amendment. The fourth protects the press, such as newspapers, news agency, journalists, etc., from being obstructed by the government from doing their work. The fifth protects the rights to protest and assemble, provided local laws are followed, like getting permits and, not being violent and whatnot. And finally, the sixth gives people the right to sign petitions for issues to be discussed by our lawmakers. The third and fourth parts really are the core of the issue that we're talking about, and that really is that the only regulation of speech directly bound by our Constitution is of, pretty much government employees and direct government contractors. Private corporations are not bound by the Constitution in the same way as government employed people, and it's being interpreted as more of like conglomerations of people rather than, like a government entity, and that allows them to have a greater control over speech. Since this is the case, they can regulate speech on their platforms in a way that bypasses the protections of the First Amendment. Since they're not publishers of the content themselves, they're protected by 40 U.S.C. Section 230, defining media companies as, or these social media companies as platforms, removing their liability for the content that you put up. A news agency is regulated as a media company where they are held liable for what they say. This isn't really the same internationally, where they can be considered actually the same thing. But because they're private companies here in America, they can regulate the speech on their platforms here. Due to them being interpreted as like more of a member service, and because of that, they're held more under the umbrella of private speech regulation. In America, we're starting to have a conflict with the protected forms of expression and what is allowed by, well, really social media companies on their platforms. Unlike other countries, speech deemed offensive is protected here. Our founders understood that offensive content, if you really look at it, is relative and should be handled by society rather than government intervention. Our founders understood this and really kind of ingrained it in there. And as Dr. Jordan Peterson famously said, in order to be able to think, one must risk being offensive, which really rings true. We value this concept as Americans because with time, society changes, and unpopular and offensive speech at one time can become inverted once time progresses, such as how views on civil rights inverted over the years, gender equality inverted over the years. If you want to go back further, the oppression of speech goes all the way back to the days of, like even Galileo, guys like that weren't even allowed to talk about, a heliocentric solar system and stuff like that. Regulation of speech is regulation of ideas, pretty much, and it's something that should never be controlled. Sunshine really is the best disinfectant, as they say. Since social media platforms are geographically located also in politically leftist strongholds, such as like San Francisco, Los Angeles, Houston, New York, their employee base on the corporate and creative level tend to be from local labor pools, which are very high by proportion leftist. And when I say leftist, I mean if you align with the Democrat Party, the Democratic Socialists, the Communists, or, the straight up Progressive Party, something like that. Though data released, actually by Twitter, Google, and there was actually a study done by MIT, politically right-leaning ideas and people who, put forward politically right-leaning ideas. And when I say politically right, I mean if you're in the umbrella of Republican, Libertarian, Conservative, Neocon, Evangelical, that's really a big bulk of the political right. And those views are being suppressed via selective deplatforming, shadow bans, and even algorithmic manipulation. There was actually a case where straight up a Twitter employee came out and showed the actual algorithmic code that they were using to shadow ban people, which was in direct conflict with their testimony that they gave to our U.S. Congress. Since the political left, and when I say that in this particular case, I mean the Democratic Party, and that would mean the actual structured Democratic Party, the party managers, the people who actually run the party. They've abandoned their previous anti-corporatist ideals that the left really used to be their bread and butter of what they used to run on. They've become deeply entwined now with social media companies and major broadcast companies financially, which has been proven to have an influence in their coverage of issues especially, and their general corporate stances when it comes to media companies and what they put out as for their news, as well as generally the ideas that get pushed forward more on these platforms. The political right, and when I say that, I mean the old school rhinos and neocons mostly in this case, are the ones who are financed by the big oil companies, big corporations like GE and Walmart, the military industrial complex. These guys, they have a really minor media foothold in comparison to the political left. And when it comes to big donors, I mean, the financial base has changed, whereas the old money is starting to go away, and the new money, these big tech executives and stuff like that, are becoming the new larger financial force in these political parties. So pretty much because they have a minor media foothold versus the big donors on that side versus their opposing side, they really don't have the same amount of influence that they used to have, you could say 10, 20 years ago or further than that. When you really break it down, the language used by the opposing political sides is causing emotional responses in people. Instead of freely being able to express their ideas and frustrations at another, and instead now, expression of an idea another finds offensive, they're suppressing people in the name of their perspective morality, which is really dangerous because it's controlling speech. It's controlling a person's ability to convey an idea, which is something that should never be suppressed. We take another step closer to that, and we might as well be in 1984. Okay. I'm a big fan of dystopian novels, and if you want to really see a great example of what the purposes of controlling speech at their core are, I would definitely suggest reading the book. It is a fantastic book. In conclusion, because companies like Facebook and Twitter, along with others, are starting to deplatform people for their interpretive violations of TOS, selectively enforcing TOS, and influencing the recommendations of content to the user, they're now in a gray area, which borders the behavior of a publishing platform. It also strangely borders being a media platform as well. If this is the case, and they're a publishing platform, then they would be subject to different sets of laws, and they would be liable for the content that they have, so they would have to actually regulate it much stricter. But at the same time, they would no longer be considered a free and open platform. If, for public discourse, they're subjected to free speech protections of the Constitution, but they wouldn't be directly regulated by it, at least. If interpreted as a communications company, they would also be subject to free speech protections, but would also be regulated by the same protections that other news organizations and stuff like that enjoy, making bloggers fall under journalistic activities and bring that under the protection of actually being a platform of, again, publishing. But we really need to protect these freedoms that we enjoy. As it stands now, there is an increasing amount of censorship that's starting to come up on the internet. We need to protect the freedoms we enjoy and stand against censorship of the internet. I've heard a term being coined about a internet bill of rights. If regulation really is the only way to let this happen properly, so be it, but I personally would like to see our lawmakers draft a internet bill of rights, so to speak, for internet discourse specifically, so that we can continue to express ourselves freely as we see fit. The internet started as a free place. It always has been a free place, and we need to make sure that it stays a free place. Thank you very much for watching. If you like the content, go ahead and give it a like, give it a subscribe and whatnot. And if you have any suggestions for further videos, go ahead and leave them in the comments below. I do read all of the comments that you guys leave. Thanks again for watching, and have a great day.